The world talks endlessly about millennials and Gen Z dominate the internet. But there's one generation nobody fully understands. A generation raised without smartphone, without social media, without emotional validation from strangers online. They came home to empty house, learned to solve problems alone, and somehow become one of the most emotional self-controlled generation in the modern history. But here's the stress part. The very traits that made Gen X mentally strong may also be the reason they struggle to connect it emotionally today. This is the psychology of Gen X. And once you understand how this generation was raised, you will start seeing modern society very differently. If you enjoy deep psychological documentaries that reveal the hidden behavior of society, so subscribe because this channel explores the human mind in ways most people never notice. And if this video makes you see the world differently, leave a like. It helps more than you think. Generation X, often called the forgotten generation, includes people born roughly between the mid-1960s and early 1980s. But unlike boomers or millennials, Gen X never really had a clear culture spotlight. The world around them was transforming fast. Divorce rates were exploding. Both parents started working full-time jobs. Television became the new babysitter. And for the first time in the modern history, millions of children were spending large portions of their childhood alone. This created something psychologists rarely talk about enough. A generation trained to depend on themselves emotionally. Many Gen X kids came home from school to empty house. No text, no notification, no constant supervision. They made their own food, solved their own problems, entertained themselves for hours without the internet. This unbelievable, right? And over time, this created a mindset built around independence. But independence has a hidden cost. When children learn too early that nobody to come and rescue them emotionally, they stop expecting emotional support altogether. That's why many Gen X adults appear emotionally calm on the surface, while internally carrying stress they rarely talk about. They were taught, directly or indirectly, that vulnerability was weakness. So instead of expressing emotions openly, they learned to suppress them, and society rewarded them for it. In workplace, Gen X became known as reliable, disciplined, and adaptable. They don't complain much. They don't seek constant praise. And they usually don't need attention from strangers online to feel valuable. But psychologically, something deeper was happening beneath the surface. Unlike younger generation raised in the age of digital identity, Gen X built their identity privately. Today, many people experience life through a screen. A vacation is not complete until it's posted online. A meal is not important until it gets likes. Even emotions are often performed publicly. But Gen X grew up in the world where most moments disappeared forever. No photos, no stories uploaded, no permanent digital records. And because of that, their brains developed differently. They learn to separate private life from public image, which is exactly why many Gen X people feel exhausted by modern internet culture. To them, constant self-promotion feels unnatural because psychologically they were conditioned to value competence over visibility. This is one of the biggest difference between Gen X and younger generations. Younger generations often grow up asking, "How do I appear?" And Gen X grew up asking, "How do I survive?" That difference changed everything. It changed communication styles, relationships, careers, even emotional expectations. For example, Gen X trains to avoid emotional oversharing, not because they don't feel deeply, but because they were raised in environments where emotional self-control was considered maturity. Many of them learned to process pain silently, and over decades, silence became habit. This is why some Gen X parents appear emotionally distant to younger people. But from their perspective, providing stability was love, working hard was love, paying bills was love, and sacrificing comfort was love. They often expressed care through responsibility, not emotional language. And honesty. This created one of the most understood psychological gaps in the modern families. Younger generations frequently seek emotional reassurance. Gen X often assumes, "If I am here for you physically, you should already know I care." neither side by fully wrong. They were simply programmed by completely different worlds. And that's the key word here, programmed. Because every generation is psychologically shaped by the environment they grow up in. Boomers were shaped by post-war optimism. Millennials were shaped by economic stability and the rise of the internet. Gen Z is being shaped by algorithm, social media, and digital identity. But Gen X was shaped by uncertainty, and uncertainty creates resilience. But it also creates emotional armor. That emotional armor helped them survive difficult decades. But armor can protect you, and while also isolating you. And this becomes especially visible in relationships. Many Gen X individuals deeply value loyalty, privacy, and personal space. They don't always need constant communication to feel connected. In fact, too much communication can something feel emotionally draining to them because they come from a world where silence was normal. But today's culture moves fast. Messages arrive instantly. People expect immediately replies. Attention has become currency. But Gen X remembers a slower world. A world where people disappeared for hours without explanation. And nobody panicked. Yeah, it's really true. A world where boredom existed. And strangely enough, boredom may have been one of the greatest psychological advantages Gen X ever had. Because boredom forces the brain to think, to imagine, to reflect, to develop internal dialogue. Modern technology eliminated much of that silence. Today, the average person escapes boredom within seconds by opening an app. But Gen X spent years sitting with their own thoughts. And psychologically, that created a stronger internal independence. This may also explain why Gen X is often less emotionally reactive online compared to younger users. They did not grow up train their brain to seek instant validation from digital feedback, which makes them psychologically harder to manipulate through social trends. But here's the irony. Even though Gen X appears emotionally strong, many of them quietly struggle with loneliness because emotional independence can slowly turn into emotional isolation. And isolation is dangerous when it becomes permanent, especially for a generation taught to deal with it instead of talking openly about mental health. In many ways, Gen X become masters of functioning while emotionally exhausted. They continue working, providing, surviving, even when internally burned out. And maybe that's why this generation feels so fascinating psychologically. Because underneath the calm exterior, there's often an entire lifetime of suppressed emotion, silence, responsibility, and unspoken pressure. A pressure younger generation really see. But despite all of this, Gen X also possesses something modern society desperately needs again. Mental resilience, not performative confidence, not motivational quotes, not fake positivity online, real resilience. The kind built through silence, uncertainty, and adaptation. They learn how to live without constant attention, without endless entertainment, without needing the world to constantly confirm their value. And whether you admire Gen X or not, there's something powerful about that mindset. Because in a world obsessed with being seen, Gen X mastered surviving unseen. Maybe that's why they called the forgotten generation. But forgotten does not mean weak. Sometimes the quietest generation understand life that depends. And maybe the real question is not whether Gen X was emotionally distant. Maybe the real question is this. Did modern society become too emotionally dependent? Because the more technology connects us digitally, the more many people feel psychologically disconnected internally. And perhaps Gen X represents the final generation that learned how to exist comfortably without constant digital stimulation. A generation that still remembers what silence felt like, what privacy felt like, what real independence felt like, and honesty that might become more valuable in the future than anyone realizes. So the next time someone says Gen X is cold, emotionally unavailable, or disconnected, remember this. They were raised in the world that forced them to become emotionally self-sufficient long before they were ready. And people shaped by survival rarely express love the same way as people shaped by comfort. That difference changes generations, and it changes the human mind itself. If you enjoyed this psychological deep dive, subscribe for more cinematic documentaries about human behavior, society, and hidden psychology shaping modern life. Because sometimes understanding people change the way you see the entire world.